Welcome to the noon class. Bee-friendly recycling, make your yard a rest stop for bees. I'm Tom Aloise. Our presenter is going to be Debbie Florence, and Debbie is the District 6 coordinator for the Youth Environmental Program. Her career is centered around public service. For the past 8 years, she has worked in various capacities with the state of West Virginia, including the West Virginia Tourism Office, Department of Natural Resources, and the Department of Environmental Protection. She loves working with the youth program because it combines her passions of working with youth and promoting the conservation of our state's natural beauty and resources. She enjoys working with rescue dogs and has 4 of her own. She takes every opportunity to be close to nature and especially likes camping, boating, and fishing, bird watching, nature photography, and exploring West Virginia's scenic country roads. You never know what you might see, so she never goes far from home without a set of binoculars and her camera in hand. So I'll turn it over to Debbie.
Thanks, Tom. I'm going to start off by sharing my screen and we will get started. Okay, can everybody see and hear me?
Yes, looks good.
Okay. Well, hello, I'm Debbie and welcome to Bee Friendly Recycling, making your yard a rest stop for bees. So just for fun, look at these bee emojis and using the chat feature on Zoom, type in the number for which bee you're feeling like today. As for me, I'm number 3. I'm excited to have the chance to spend some time with you today. And I can't wait till next year when we can have camp live and in person. I can't see the chat, so what are we seeing? Are we happy today?
I'm seeing happy, excited, another happy, another happy, another happy. So that's good.
Good, I'm glad everybody's happy. Yep. So what is all the buzz about bees? Well, bee populations are diminishing at an alarming rate, and the bees need our help. What we're going to do today, as we go through, this is a little overview. First, we'll explore a little bit about bees in general, and then we'll talk about why they're so important. We'll take a look at some things that are threatening the bee populations, and we hope you'll be inspired to help the bees. So if you are, we're going to tell you some ways to be friendly. And then to wrap it up, I'm going to show you some easy ways you can recycle or reuse things you probably have around your house to help the bees. Let's get started examining some facts about bees. There are over 20,000 bee species in the world. 4,000 of them are native to the US, and there are 124 species in West Virginia. Since honeybees are the most familiar, we're going to focus on them. Well, bees are classified as insects, and they share 5 characteristics that are common to most insects. This slide here shows the anatomy of a honeybee, and they have a hard outer shell called an exoskeleton. They have 3 main body parts: head, thorax, and abdomen. They have a pair of antennae that are attached to their head, and the antennae detect scents. They have 170 scent receptors, and the scent receptors are stimulated by the substances that are around the bees, and then those receptors send a message to the brain identifying the scent. And bees are also able to detect scents through their mouths and the tips of their legs, which are called tarsi. And all of these parts have sensilla, or very small hair-like organs that are equipped with these nerve receptor cells. And of course, everybody knows about a stinger. That's found on the hind part of the bee. And then honeybees have a hairy tongue called a glossa, and the nectar sticks to that so they can pull it into their mouth and store it in their honey stomach. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. And they also have a straw-like mouth part that's used to drink fluids, and that's called a proboscis. Insects have compound eyes that are made of many light detectors, and then they also have a separate type of eyes called ocelli, which are used to detect motion. Honeybees are social insects, and so they live together in a well-organized family group called a colony. It's important to note, though, that most bees are solitary. Members of the colony, they're categorized into 3 classes. They're the workers, the drones, and then there's the queen. Each member has a really specific job to perform within the colony. And the worker bees and the queen bees are females, and the drone is the male bee. Here we have a side-by-side comparison of the 3 classes. So it's kind of interesting to note that even though all of these are honeybees, as you can see, they vary in form and size, depending on if they're a worker, a queen, or a drone. And this makes them better adapted or equipped to do their job within the colony. As I mentioned, the worker bee is a female honeybee, and she starts working the day she hatches, and her jobs change as she ages. And she wears many, many different hats in her short lifetime. As soon as she hatches, she works to clean the hive. So she's a housekeeper. And then she might become a nurse. So she feeds the brood or the babies and also the developing larvae. She could be a builder. So when she's a builder, she produces wax and helps build the honeycombs. At some point, she'll be an undertaker. And in this role, she removes any bees that have died out from the hive. And she also has to serve as a guard. So she protects the hive from outside invaders. And this is a risky job. So she risks her life every day doing this because once a honeybee has to use her stinger, she dies. She also will be a warehouse worker. And in this capacity, she stores pollen in the honeycomb cells when the foraging bees bring it back to the hive. And pollen is used to feed baby bees and then the other bees as well. She could serve as a personal assistant. So in that capacity, she tends to the queen by feeding and grooming her. And then one of her other jobs is to be a fanner. She fans the hive with her wings to keep it cool. So she's kind of like the air conditioning system for the hive. And maybe last but not least, but most importantly, and this is one of the last roles that she'll take on before she dies, is she's a forager. She searches for food and gathers it for the hive. So when we think about all these jobs, I'd say that's probably where they got the saying busy bee, because this little worker bee is definitely busy. And a single colony can have from about 50,000 to 60,000 workers. So the drones are the male honeybees, and I kind of think of them as being lazy because they only have one job to do. Their sole purpose in life is to mate with the queen. And unlike the workers, the drones do not have stingers, so they can't sting you, and they are not capable of collecting pollen. A queen bee runs the whole hive. She is the largest honeybee and is the only one capable of laying eggs for the next generation. One queen may produce up to 250,000 eggs. Sorry about my phone. Let me see if I can get it to stop. It was making sure I have my extended warranty done. Anyway, back to the queen. Queen honeybee runs the whole hive, and she is the largest bee, as we saw when we looked at the comparison. And she is the only one that's capable of laying eggs to produce the next generation that will keep the hive going. So she can produce up to 250,000 eggs in 1 year, and get this, possibly more than 1 million in her lifetime. The queen also releases these chemicals, and they're kind of serve as an instruction guide to tell the other bees what to do in the colony to keep it running. So queen bees don't wear crowns. So how can you tell which one she is? Here's a few things you can look for. Look for the long pointed abdomen. look for a bee with a shiny black spot, and look for the largest bee. So just for fun, I'm going to show you this colony of bees and look around a little bit and see if you can find the queen. If you can spot it, you can just type yes in the chat box, or you don't even have to do that. But I'm just going to give you a few seconds here to look around and see if you can find her. Do we have any spotters, Tom?
I'm looking here. Like anybody yet? Oh, I think I see her, Sarah says. Jenna says yes.
She's not easy to see. I had a hard time finding her, but there she is. I circled her in red.
Oh, yeah.
Well, of course, honeybees make the honey that we enjoy, and honey is a natural sweetener, and it's been used for centuries in medicine to battle or cure just a whole number of ailments. And pure honey is the only food on earth that doesn't spoil. That's pretty interesting. Now, bees don't make honey just because they know us humans and other animals love it and they want to make us happy. Bees make honey for themselves, and honey is made from collecting nectar of flowering plants, and it's stored inside the beehive for eating during times when food is scarce. So this is just a little overview of how bees make honey. First of all, you can just kind of follow around in the octagons or the honeycombs here. The foragers leave the hive in search of food and nectar, which is a sugary liquid, and it's extracted from flowers using the bee's long tube-shaped tongue. And the bee stores the nectar in its extra stomach, which is sometimes called a crop or a honey stomach. And this stomach is a pre-digestive part of the digestive tract system. So as the bee flies from flower to flower, the nectar splashes around in their honey stomach and it mixes with enzymes, and the enzymes help transform its chemical composition and its pH, and that prepares it for long-term storage. So when the honeybee returns to the hive, which would be right about here at number 4, it passes the nectar to another worker bee by regurgitating the liquid into the other bee's mouth. And then the partially digested nectar is deposited into the honeycomb. So when we think about part of the honey making process being regurgitation, what we sometimes call vomiting or throwing up, it doesn't make honey sound very appetizing, does it? But truly, this process is not the same thing. So the honey stomach, which we humans do not have, is equipped with like this valve that's called, I'll try and pronounce it right, proventriculus. And what that is, it's kind of more like a pump. So since the nectar is never mixed with the digestive food in the internal tract of the bee, it's not the same as what we think of as vomiting. So you can still be loving honey. So once that comb, once in the comb, the nectar is still kind of a liquid form, and it's nothing like the thick honey that we think of that we use at the breakfast table. So to get all that extra water out of the honey, one of the worker bees, remember we saw one of them would be a fanner, one of the fanner worker bees will flap their wings and circulate the air to help speed up the evaporation process. So when most of the water has evaporated from the honeycomb, the bees seal the comb with a secretion of liquid that comes from their abdomen, and then that hardens into beeswax. And as I mentioned earlier, honey never goes bad, so this can be stored in the hive indefinitely, and it provides bees with the perfect food source for cold winter months when there's not other sources for them. So here's something interesting about honey. Honey's color, taste, smell, and texture, they really vary greatly depending upon the type of flower that the bee collected the nectar from. So like clover honey, for example, is a lot different than honey that might come from bees that frequently, that went to flying around to dandelion flowers. So take a look at this honeycomb and notice the variations in color in the hexagonal cells. The uniqueness of each flower's nectar is why the combs are so many different colors. And I just think that looks like a beautiful work of art. So we know bees collect nectar to use for food, but did you know that they also collect pollen for food? The nectar they use for energy, and the pollen provides protein and other nutrients for them. Honeybees have a really interesting system for storing pollen. Because they're extremely fuzzy animals, pollen sticks to them every time they visit a flower. It sticks to their antennae, their legs, their faces, their bodies. Basically, they're a pollen magnet. So located on the front and middle legs, there's a special little notch that has like a fringe of hairs. And these hairs kind of work like a comb. And the bees run this comb notch over their body, scraping off all the collected pollen. And from there, the pollen is transferred into these things called pollen baskets. They're also sometimes called saddlebags or pollen sacks. And they're located on the bee's hind legs. And you can see them really good in that picture to the right, and then also on the left where the bee's flying. And a full pollen basket can hold upwards of 1 million grains of pollen. And some pollen is used by the bees for food. It's especially for the developing larvae. And also the bees transfer it from plant to plant. So that's really important. And that process is called pollination. So the bees collect nectar and pollen from a flower. Some of the pollen from the flower's stamen sticks to the bee's hair. And then when the bee visits the next flower, the pollen rubs off the bee onto the flower's pistil. And that transfer of pollen fertilizes the flower of the plant. And that's what eventually leads to fruits, vegetables, flowers, nuts, and other plants. And that brings us to the importance of bees. You've likely heard of bees being referred to as pollinators, and pollination is the reason bees are so important. So pollination is vital for biodiversity, wild plant growth, and our food supply, just to name a few reasons why it's so important. As pollinators, bees are vital for the preservation of ecological balance and biodiversity in nature. They support the growth of trees and flowers and other plants, and they even help to grow forests, which we know forests are important. They serve as food and shelter for creatures large and small. And keep in mind the immense importance of trees. Amongst other things, they provide much of the oxygen we breathe. So it's all intertwined. And it's not just the farm-grown fruits and vegetables that humans rely on from pollinators to thrive. Many species of wild plants depend on pollinators too. So bees are responsible for the production of many seeds and nuts and berries that are vital sources of food for our wild animals out in nature. And maybe most important to us is our food supply. There's no overemphasizing the importance of bees to our food supply. They're important because they pollinate our fields, orchards, and gardens. And by doing that, they provide about 1/3 of the food we eat. So without them, our fields and gardens would be bare and our plates would be empty. Half of our native bee populations are in decline, and it's mostly due to pesticides, pollution, and habitat loss. Those are the main threats that bees face. And it's really important that we all act now to help the bees before it's too late. So here's a few ways that you can help, and these are pretty simple things, but every little thing that we do can make a difference. So to start off, you can discover, so you could learn more about bees and pollination, so you can tell other people about bees. When I was little, all I knew about bees was that they had stingers and I was afraid of them. So now I'm like obsessed with them because they're such interesting creatures and they do such awesome things. Another thing you could do is plant some bee-friendly flowers. Native plants are always best. You could plant a tree because think about this. When a tree blooms, it provides hundreds, if not thousands, of blossoms for the bees to feed from. And trees are not only a great food source for bees, but they also provide needed habitat. But when you think about planting or maintaining your yard or garden, please do not use pesticides or other chemicals. There are natural and organic ways that you can do things to promote growth and also to control pests. A simple thing we all can do is litter cleanup. Litter leads to their habitat loss, so we can help the bees keep their nesting sites and food foraging areas clean just by staging a litter cleanup and always doing your best to reduce, reuse, and recycle. You could create a bee watering station. So bees get thirsty just like us, and they need water to survive. So providing them a source of fresh water is a big help. Another way to help them is to give them a resting place. One way to give bees a boost is to provide a place to rest and nest, and I'll show you a neat one you can do in just a minute. And last thing is to be a citizen scientist. So you can collect data on bees, gather photos and other information about native bees that you see, and then upload them into the iNaturalist or a similar app. So have you ever been on a long trip in the car and you just can't wait to stop at the rest area? That's how bees basically feel after a long day of foraging for food. And a single bee might fly as far as 5 miles looking for food. That's a lot of wing flapping for such a little insect. And combined, a strong colony of bees, which could be about 60,000 bees, flies the equivalent of the distance from the Earth all the way to the moon every day. And like I said, just like us, bees need food, water, and a place to rest. So planting a flower, making a simple do-it-yourself bee watering station or a bee hotel can make a big difference in helping them. You can easily make one or all of these by recycling things you already have around the house. So besides helping the bees, you're also helping the environment. But actually, the correct term would be reuse things you already have around the house. While the words reuse and recycle are often used interchangeably, reusing really means to use again, so use things in a different way rather than throwing them away. And the term recycling refers to the process when waste is sent to a factory and converted into reusable materials. Oh, and another thing you can do, or rather I should say there's something not to do, is not mow your lawn as much. But if that's one of your chores, check with your parents first. I don't want you to get in trouble. But you can explain to them that by keeping the mowing to a minimum, we are helping the bees. So a neatly kept lawn is nice, but letting it grow a bit invites the bees to visit plants like clover and dandelions, and it helps other insects too. If anyone was in the firefly presentation yesterday, Nicole told us the same thing, that leaving the grass a little longer can do a lot to help the declining firefly populations. So here are some pictures of some things you can make to turn your yard into a rest area, and just be creative. So the first one is a shallow dish filled with marbles for a watering station. And then next we have a plastic bottle and paper bags that are being reused to make a shelter. And we'll run through how to make one of these next. Then we have a flower pot that's been turned upside down, and the catch dish, which is usually actually under the pot, is now on top of the pot and filled with rocks to give the bees a water source. And this last one, I haven't tried to make one yet, the one on the end, but I'm collecting materials to do it. So save or collect bottle caps and then reuse them by mounting them on a board or pole or even a stick, and then fill them with water to create a lot of mini watering stations. So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can see me, and then we'll look at some ways to recycle for the bees. So what food source do you have around the house that you could reuse as a, like, what do you have that you could reuse as a planter to make a food source? I found this. See if you can, let's see if I can get this right so you can see it. I'll hug it. So this is a plastic container that Milk-Bone dog biscuits came in. And I think this would make a great planter to plant a native plant. And so what I'm going to do is drill or punch a few holes in the bottom for drainage. And I could decorate it with decals or paint a design, but I think I'm going to take the label off and just leave it clear. That way I can see the root system as the plant grows, and that would be kind of interesting. And I'm going to pick up a plant at my local nursery. They gave me a list of favorite pollinator plants, so they're going to help me find a plant just right for the bees. Another thing I do is I have this egg crate. This one, only 6 eggs came in, and I'm going to fill up each little section with some potting soil. And then I have a pack of seeds. And so I'll use this to get my seeds started. I'll put them down about halfway and add the soil to each section and just a little bit of water, water it lightly. And this is a good starter place for your seeds until the plants are big enough to go into a pot or out into your garden. And for a water station, getting water can be really difficult for tiny flying creatures like the bees, especially because they do not swim well. So when creating your water station, you want to start with a shallow container, and then I add things like rocks or marbles to give the bees a safe place to land to drink the water. The most important factor is to make sure the water level is not deep enough that they can get in it and then drown. So you want to cover the rocks and marbles. And then also, bees taste really good to birds. So to avoid them becoming lunch, you want to put the water station in a sunny, sheltered place, but make sure it's away from any bird feeders or bird baths that you have. And then when filling with tap water, we recommend letting the water sit out for 24 hours before filling your station. And then lastly, you also want to make sure like you rinse your rocks and marbles and everything frequently so there's no bacteria buildup, and then keep the water clean and safe for the bees. So on this one, I have this pie plate that was kind of burned and I didn't want to use it for food anymore. And so I filled it with these marbles that I had from a fish tank that I used to have. And then I'll just fill it with water till it's barely touching the marbles, and then the bees can sit on the marbles and be able to get a drink of water. Another one I made is with this plate. This is a mismatched plate that I had, and because it's kind of an earthy tone, I decided just to go out and gather some rocks. So I just gathered some natural rocks, and the plate's concave enough that it does have, it will hold water. And then once again, I'm going to just fill it up enough that the bees can reach the water from the rocks without drowning. So with the exception of honeybees, most bees are solitary creatures, but they're also very important pollinators. So a bee condo or a bee hotel, they have small tube-like apartments. They allow species like mason bees to take up residence, or gives them a safe place to rest. And you can purchase one. Let's see if you can see this. Someone that knows that I love bees, I'm trying to get it not to, gave me this one for a gift. But an easy, environmentally friendly way to make a resting place for bees is to recycle a plastic bottle and a paper grocery bag, and I'll show you how. Won't have time to make the whole thing, so I'm just going to show you some of the basic steps. First, you just need your plastic bottle. You'll need some twine, a pen, a ruler, a pair of scissors, a pencil, and your grocery bag, and some tape. And don't worry to try and write down all the instructions. We'll have a link that you can visit to get instructions for this. And so the first thing you want to do is start with a clean, dry plastic bottle, and then I'm going to remove the label. And then the next thing I'm going to do is just take my scissors and cut off the top. And I'm sorry that y'all can't see this, but I'm just going to cut off the top, like the part that has where you would drink from. And you could use a utility knife for this too, but these bottles are kind of crunchy and easy to cut, so I'm just using scissors. And once you have that done, you'll want to take your paper bag and you want to cut approximately 30 strips from your paper bag. And mine are 2 inches wide by about 5.5 inches tall. But the thing you want to do is measure the length of your bottle once you have the top cut off, because you don't want your strips to be sticking out of the end of the bottle. Once you have your strips cut, here's kind of what mine look like after I cut them out. Take your pencil, and then you'll just wrap the paper bag around your pencil, your strip. And you don't have to worry about these being all the exact same size or anything, because as you saw on the one that was store-bought, all the little tubes were different sizes, so just go for it. And then what I like to do while it's still on the pencil is I'll take a little piece of tape, and I like to put one at each end. Just tape it around to kind of hold it in place. And then once that's done, I just slide the tube right off my pencil, and then I can add it to my plastic bottle. So here's kind of what it looks like once you have it all done. It took me about 30 of these to put in my bottle, and you just keep rolling them and then putting them in until you have it full. And then what you'll want to do is just take some string or twine. I wrapped it about 3 times around my bottle and made a loop with a little at the end, so I'll be able to hang it up. And when you're ready to hang up your bee hotel, what you want to do is face the bee hotel to the east or the southeast, because bees like the heat from the morning sun to get up and get moving. So this is a really easy way you can help the environment and be bee friendly. And that is all I have today. If anybody has any questions, I will be happy to try and answer them. And thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll take some time to make something for the bees.
Okay, thanks, Debbie. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Other than the lavishing praise on you, Debbie, in the chat box.
My coworkers have to do that.
That was excellent. Very interesting. I knew honeybees died after stinging you, but I didn't know how. Did you talk about that? I Googled it while you were going through it.
Just the females can sting,
Right,
because the drones don't have stingers. And yes, once on the honeybee, once they do sting you, that is the end of their life. So they try and avoid it at all costs.
Right. I was reading that once they sting you, the stinger embeds in you, and when they fly away, it's still attached to them, or it kind of pulls it's kind of gruesome, but it kind of pulls their bottom part of their body off. And they
Exactly.
basically, yeah, right,
Because sometimes you can see, actually, I've had a stinger in me and you can see it still just pumping the venom into.
right, right. Okay, so
Do other bees that are not make similar like honey to feed their babies? Yes, they do use pollen to feed their babies, but they don't really use they don't make like a honey like nectar. Honeybees are the only ones that make the honey.
okay, any more questions? I think we're good.
Ashley asks, so honey is bee throw up? Yes, it
Yes,
is. That kind of makes you not want to eat
you
it.
answered that though. You answered
Yeah,
that kind of right without directly answering her. You did answer that a little bit right
exactly.
after. Okay, so we have one more class for today at 1 o'clock. So it looks like you have a little bit of time. You can leave the room and go back to the main room, or as always, just leave the meeting and sign back on at 1 o'clock. So we'll see you then. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.